Thank you, everybody, for joining the Milton Public Library. I'm Angie, and we've got a special guest, Susan, here today with us. And I'm going to let her introduce herself, and then she's going to tell us all about having a bird-friendly yard.
All right. Thanks, Angie. Can everybody hear me okay? Hopefully so. All right. Before I jump in to this, let me share my screen with everyone and share some pretty pictures with us all. How about that? All right. There we go. Okay. I'm also going to put the chat feature up on my screen in case anybody wants to send a message really quick. If I happen to catch it, I will be more than happy to answer it during the presentation. Otherwise, feel free to ask me anything at the end. So again, thanks to Angie and the Milton Public Library for the invitation to speak tonight. I always jump at the opportunity to share my love of birds, and I love talking about them with others who share my enthusiasm. And I'm hoping that everybody who is in attendance tonight is indeed a bird fan. So just to forward my presentation here, there we go. A little bit about me before I get started. If many of you are trying to figure out where the accent is coming from, it's because I am a native of the Deep South. I grew up in Louisiana. And I first became interested in birds as an undergraduate and took my first ornithology class, and I was hooked. From then on, when I was working on my master's degree, I got really interested in animal behavior. For my dissertation work, I actually worked with northern cardinals, which I still work with today. I've worked with them for over 10 years. What brought me to the Midwest was working at UW-Madison. I had a postdoctoral fellowship where I worked with European starlings for quite a bit, but I came back to the cardinal because I can't help it. I love them. And where I am now is I am currently an assistant professor in the biology department at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. But if you were to ask me to describe myself, all of this looks really nice on paper, but at the end of the day, I'm a wife, I'm a parent, I have two kiddos, 1 6, 1 4, two little girls, and I'm an avid birder. Over 45 million people in this country identify as being a bird enthusiast, and I'm proud to say that I am one of them. So, welcome. All right. So, I have to always put this in presentations that I give now, considering we've had such an unusual year in our life, or year and a half, going on possibly 2 now. Um, Bird watching got a newly found respect last year as we were all sort of stuck in our homes during spring migration. And a lot of people purchased their first bird feeders just to see what they could potentially attract. And many were surprised that regardless of where you live, you usually can attract something to come to your feeder if you have the right seed or the right food for any particular species. So this always kind of makes me chuckle a little bit. I had quite a few coworkers that sent me this meme saying that they had never really watched their bird feeders before so intensely, but they had like identified certain birds that had certain aggressive tendencies, certain birds who seemed to be a little more caring, and they actually really enjoyed the fights, which kind of cracked me up a little bit because I have a background in working with aggressive behavior in birds. But anyway, hopefully your level of enthusiasm with watching birds is to this degree. All right. So one of the questions that I get a lot about folks when I tell them that I work with birds is what's one of the benefits of having a backyard habitat? And aren't the woods enough? Why should I spend my time and my money to make my backyard more hospitable for animals that have, their own territories elsewhere? And well, there's lots of good reasons actually to make the backyards more hospitable because after all, our communities and neighborhoods disrupt natural habitats in the first place. I mean, our houses weren't here before the woods. Therefore, it helps us reconnect our property with the ecosystem. Okay, there isn't this big void in the ecosystem where they won't find any resources that might help sustain them. by having resources available in your yard year round, you help not only your local wildlife species that you have, but also those that might be cruising through. A lot of migratory birds stop by at feeders both in the spring and in the fall. Probably some of you have hummingbirds at your feeder right now. They'll be taken off at the end of September or so to head back south. It's good to help them begin their journey because that is quite a long flight. It also helps us, especially if you keep your food available during the winter time. It helps to keep our resident species sustained. I know there's nothing quite as satisfying as looking at a bird feeder when we have, a foot of snow on the ground and watching it absolutely surrounded by 20 or 25 different birds. Having that there not only brings us enjoyment, but it also helps keep those resident species calories up during those really cold winter months. And last but not least, it's just good for us to reconnect with nature. I know after a long day, or if I'm having a particularly stressful day, I find myself gravitating towards a window or looking out the yard and just wanting to watch something natural happen that isn't necessarily stressful. And bird watching, it helps us. It helps us reconnect with that which is around us. Okay. Now, whenever we think about a bird-friendly backyard, it can be kind of overwhelming when you think about all the things that a slide like this would suggest to put in your yard. Okay. You might be looking at this and thinking, oh my gosh, this is like a brand new landscaping project. This would cost thousands of dollars. And yes, if you were to completely redo your backyard and try to incorporate all of these elements, all of these plants at once, it would be an expensive endeavor. But the bottom line is that when you want to attract birds to your yard or to your balcony, if you happen to live in an apartment or wherever you may be, as long as there's some natural resource nearby, you really only need three things. You need food, you need water, and you need cover where the birds can hide if they feel that a predator is near. So while all of these aspects on this slide are very nice, okay, at the end of the day, you really only need something like this, okay? This is someone's really nice looking backyard, but you can see they have not spent tons of money on renovating this or landscaping this. There's a natural water source in the back that the birds use. They have a few feeders here in the foreground, and they have some plants that are brightly colored to attract pollinators, birds, and all sorts of wildlife into this area. Okay, I've arranged habitats in many places. I have lived in 4 different states now in the country. I've had large backyards. I've had small urban yards. That's kind of where I am right now. I live in Edgerton and I have a really small yard in the middle of the city. I don't have a great area to landscape right now. I'm working on it slowly. But I've even lived on many apartments, and I have found ways to make my balcony bird friendly, where I've attracted lots of woodpeckers, migrants as they've come through. And all you really do need to have to make a welcoming space is a feeder, a water dish, and a potted plant if you live in a really small area like a fern where birds can go and hide if they feel like a predator is approaching. Okay, so let's talk about food first. All right, food is the first essential component to provide in a bird habitat. Plants are important as they can offer food themselves, such as seed or nectar, or they can attract insects that birds consume. When we talk about plants, and you'll see some examples here over the next few slides, native plants are best. Native plants are best because these are the plants that local wildlife are going to have encountered prior, okay? And 2 really easy plants to grow in Wisconsin yards are going to be things like common milkweed, which is going to, of course, attract monarchs, which my 6-year-old is obsessed with. I think she's more excited about the butterflies than the bird aspect to our yard right now. But also really colorful plants like black-eyed Susans or purple coneflowers. Anything that's bright is going to be effective at attracting a bird or some other type of pollinator. Supplemental feeders are also really great to attract birds year round. Okay. These can really come in handy during the winter months and spring migration here in Wisconsin when we don't necessarily have a whole lot of plants that are blooming at that time. Having a supplemental feeder with oranges in it for orioles as they come through is absolutely a great idea. But what I tell folks is while both of these are really great ideas, the best idea, in my opinion, is to have a combination of both, to have some bird feeders available, not too many because you don't want an overcrowding situation to occur. We'll talk a little bit about overcrowding and how that can assist with disease transmission in just a bit. But a combination of both a few feeders and native plants is actually the most effective way to attract the widest variety of birds to whatever area that you're trying to enhance. Okay, so the types of plants, I was telling Angie earlier, I am not a botanist by any means. I won't be able to answer a ton of questions, particularly about native plants here in Wisconsin. I'm learning my plants as I am working in the outdoors here, but I do know of a few that at least birds in my own backyard and others that I've worked with have said really tend to attract lots of different birds, particularly hummingbirds at this time of year. Native plants are going to help native pollinators, and they're also going to help a wide variety of birds. And whenever you're picking out native plants, the idea here is to try to mimic a natural woodland habitat. Okay, have some tall plants, have some short plants, have some dense plants, have some colorful plants. Get some plants that have a wide variety of resources that they can offer, whether it be tube shaped for hummingbirds, which offer nectar, or a variety of things that have berries for fruits and seeds. Sunflowers are fantastic for this because they attract lots of pollinators. They have insects, which lots of birds will consume. But then whenever they die and the seeds dry, they provide a resource for the birds throughout lots of the winter. Um, Lots of color is just fantastic in a backyard habitat. Not only is it going to attract birds and pollinators, it's also going to put a lot of pop of color in your yard and make it really visually appearing. But whenever you walk into a nursery, a plant nursery, and you're looking for things to sort of accentuate your backyard habitat, don't be overwhelmed by the choices that are there because there are going to be a lot. Do a little bit of homework before you go in and kind of realize, well, what do I really want to attract here? Do I want to attract hummingbirds? Do I want to attract more seed eaters? Or do I want to maybe put some shrubs in that would provide perhaps some cover, maybe some shrubs that have fruit during the winter time that would help out and attract birds that are looking for fruit still remaining in this when the snow falls. Kind of have a game plan, and it keeps you from getting overwhelmed whenever you walk into a really large plant nursery. All right, so some really good native backyard plants that will attract both birds and a wide variety of pollinators to your home space and also make your yard really bright and colorful are the following. So I personally love purple coneflower. I love purple coneflower. These attract a wide variety of birds. They attract hummingbirds. They attract lots of different seed eaters. They attract lots of different pollinators, big giant eastern tiger swallowtail butterflies love these. Monarchs will also check them out. Purple coneflower is really easy to grow from seed, and I had a little pollinator garden project started in my backyard this spring, and this was something that I made sure to include. Trumpet honeysuckle down at the bottom is red, so it's automatically going to attract the attention of a hummingbird, and it's also got that nice trumpet shape, which means it's going to be just perfect for that little needle-shaped bill. This is also one that's also going to be relatively easy to grow and sustain. I also really like incorporating sunflowers in a backyard because it's sort of the gift that keeps on giving from a flower perspective, a floral perspective. It attracts insects, it attracts lots of different pollinators, and then whenever the plant itself is withering and dying, the flower heads are going to have seeds that remain, which are going to support a lot of your different seed eaters. live not too far from Silverwood Park here on the outskirts of Edgerton. And last year they planted their fields in nothing but sunflowers at the end of the summer. And they were absolutely gorgeous. It was absolutely gorgeous. But then whenever I went back with my kids for a walk, later on at the end of the fall and actually at the beginning of winter, we were surprised to see that there were still birds that were going to the sunflower heads and were able to extract seeds from it even that late in the year. So this is a good investment for your yard. And last but not least is winterberry. I like winterberry, a nice native holly. Winterberry is really, really good for attracting insects early on when they bloom. And then they give you this nice fruit which sustains through the wintertime. If you like cardinals, and you have winterberry in your yard, you're going to be a very happy person because cardinals really, really like this particular type of fruit. All right, so there are many, many, many different types that you can invest in. And I have a link at the end of the presentation if you're looking for information on how to best select native plants for your yard. There are folks out there that can help you make the best choice for whatever type of space you're trying to work in. All right, supplemental feeders are fun. This was sort of my first experience with birds growing up as a kid. My parents didn't really care too much about landscaping the yard for birds, but we did always have bird feeders around and we always like to see hummingbirds come in. A platform feeder is going to be really good for birds that feed on the ground. So if you have birds that like to scratch the ground looking for seeds, a platform feeder gives them a nice level, platform, a level grounding where they can actually plant and they will feel most comfortable feeding from these. Cardinals, for instance, really like platform feeders. Tube feeders are going to be good for birds that feed on the perch. Okay, so birds, a lot of things like house finches will eat off of tube feeders. Goldfinches will also eat off of tube feeders as well. If they're accustomed to feeding on a perch, they don't mind a tube feeder. A thistle sock is great for goldfinches and pine siskins. I saw more pine siskins this year than I ever have during the winter months in Wisconsin. It was kind of fun. Let's see, suet feeders are great for attracting woodpeckers. Although during the deep part of winter, you will see lots and lots of other species trying suet out because suet is so calorie dense with it being mostly fat. You can get lots of different types of suet, some with seeds, some with fruits, and some species will prefer one over the other. And last but not least, we have fruit feeders here. Fruit feeders are really great if you have orioles that migrate onto your property and stick around, or if they're just passing through, they're really gonna like that something sweet there. The only caveat is that you're also gonna attract other things that like sweet things like ants, so you kind of have to keep an eye on that. And then last but not least, we have our traditional nectar feeders. A question that I always get about hummingbird nectar feeders is, does the hummingbird food have to be red? It does not. It does not have to be red. A clear sugar solution, I have a recipe for at the end of this presentation, is more than sufficient. It is important that something on the feeder have something red on it to attract them. And I've had really good success personally this year keeping 2 or 3 hummingbirds in my backyard, which is kind of a feat here in the middle of town, by actually taking my nectar feeder and putting it inside my little pollinator garden. So sometimes the birds go to the feeder, sometimes they go to the flowers around them. It ends up working out really well. Okay, different types of seeds. Well, the type of seed you put in is going to basically kind of dictate what you attract to your feeders. Most of the blends that you get are going to have a mixture of millet and safflower and black oil sunflower seeds. Cardinals love black oil sunflower seeds. They will also eat safflower. And because lots of nuisance species will eat sunflower seeds, so sort of like blue jays who are kind of bossy at the feeders, squirrels also really like sunflower seeds. If you have a mix that's higher in safflower, that will actually kind of dissuade some of those species to not visit your feeder as much because it's not worth it from a calorie point of view for them. Cracked corn is also a really good attractant, but it will also attract other species that you might not want, such as house sparrows, which are an invasive species. Um, if you take the cracked corn out of your mixture, then that should help reduce the number of house sparrows that you see. Uh, Blue jays, folks typically like to see at their feeders, but they don't like to see them hogging it and chasing all the other species away. If you offer a feeder that's full of peanuts, typically they will prefer the peanuts and they will leave the other feeders alone. Again, suet is going to be really good for attracting a lot of tree climbing species. Woodpeckers just absolutely love it. And thistle is fantastic for attracting goldfinches and other species such as pine siskins on a fairly frequent basis. So I'm not, gonna tell folks where the best place to get sunflower seed is, but I will say that if you have a choice to buy a better blend versus an inexpensive blend, the better blend is usually worth it because it will have greater quality seed. The cheaper blends usually have more millet within them that the birds don't necessarily eat as readily. So while you may be getting more, poundage for the price, you're not getting as high a quality of a blend as if you paid a little bit more. So that's just my 2 cents. I've spent lots and lots of money on birdseed in the past. I have a giant 50-gallon garbage can full of birdseed, and I pay a little bit more to get a little bit higher quality of the blend to attract a greater diversity of birds. All right. And I know everyone who has had a bird feeder has seen something like this. Squirrels inevitably find it. They love to raid them. They will pull them down. They will do the most incredible acrobatic moves to get to them. And everyone wants to know how to remove them from their bird feeding areas, how to get them to deter them. And the bottom line is that, well, if you can figure it out, let me know, because there is no known 100% guaranteed proof squirrel proof feeder out there on the market. Everybody will tell you this. You can try some things. You can try putting caging around the pole that your bird feeder is on. Sometimes that will deter them. You can try a baffle, okay, a wide baffle that will keep them or at least slow them down for approaching the feeder and getting into it. Again, feeding safflower instead of the sunflower seeds will sometimes deter them because they might not find that all the effort is worth it. I will encourage people not to use some of the old attempts that folks have said are guaranteed to work, like using petroleum or cooking oil and putting them on the poles, because if the squirrels get that on their fur, it's really hard for them to get that off. And ingesting it while cleaning themselves can actually make them sick. So when folks tell me how to get rid of how to get rid of squirrels, I basically say just learn to embrace them and do the best you can. Again, try maybe changing up the mix that you feed and see if that could potentially deter them a little bit. But in the end, squirrels are part of our wildlife habitat. They're part of our backyard wildlife habitat, especially. And I personally enjoyed attracting both gray squirrels and seeing chipmunks come to the area. Growing up in the deep South, I didn't see chipmunks on a regular basis, so I still find them kind of cute as opposed to annoying. And I like seeing the occasional red squirrel that comes around. So try to embrace the squirrel. Don't do anything that would potentially harm them, and we'll all be okay. Second thing that you need to have in your backyard is water. Okay, so if you don't live near a natural water source, providing water in your backyard habitat will be important for attraction. If you do live next to a natural water source, it's not necessarily as important to have this, like if you have a nearby pond or lake or stream. But you might want to consider adding a water source if you do not live near a natural water resource. So these can be anything from bird baths to artificial ponds. An inexpensive bird bath is actually a really great way to satisfy this water requirement. The only caveat is that it should be shallow. We don't necessarily want anything deeper than about 3 inches because birds feel uncomfortable wading in anything deeper than that. consider placing it on the ground as opposed to elevating it. And adding a heater in the winter is actually a good idea because, yes, birds can get water from snow and other resources, but it's just easier if they don't have to do that because they don't have to burn those calories for those energy requirements. So if they can get water in your backyard, well, that's just easier for them. They're going to go to that resource. Um, Artificial ponds, I have a friend of mine who has one of these, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. I have not invested in one of these yet, but he had the time and wanted to do it right, and he did do it right. Um, with an artificial pond, it basically is going to provide the same resource that you would find potentially in a small pond or a nearby lake. Um, Having it aerated is a good idea, and this can be accomplished by using a pond pump. But because the ponds are going to be deeper than the 3 inches usually that the birds feel comfortable wading in or approaching anyway, um, my recommendation is to add some rocks as islands in your pond so that they can hop from rock to rock and not necessarily feel as though they have to take the plunge to get a drink of water. A lot of these ponds will sort of have a really steep drop off there on the edges, and they don't necessarily have a gradual entrance into the pond. Okay. The last thing that is absolutely essential for your backyard is for birds to have some place to take cover. Okay. If birds do not feel safe, they will not come to your backyard often. And adding a few basic elements where birds can take cover can drastically increase the bird traffic in your yard. So, cover is going to be needed to help them escape predators, to help them escape the elements when it's super cold or it's super hot, and actually to help them catch prey if they need it for a camouflaging purposes. Um, to add cover to your yard, it can be something as simple as putting shrubs in, or something as simple as putting some plants that you're adding to your backyard habitat, planting them rather densely, where if birds are nearby at a feeding station, they can just bolt underneath that if they sense that a hawk is cruising through the neighborhood. Planting in layers is a good idea because it sort of mimics the forest habitat from ground to canopy. Evergreens are going to help give cover year round. And if while you might not necessarily be super thrilled about planting things in your yard that have thorns, thorns are actually a really good way for birds to find cover because if we don't like thorns, lots of other species don't either. So they're not willing to brave going into a thorny bush to protect themselves. If you have any snags on your yard, any dead decaying trees where they have holes carved out within them, leave them. Leave them. You will attract lots of different species, whether it be woodpeckers, whether it be swallows. You are possibly, if it's large enough, maybe even owls. Those are really important cavities. Those tree cavities are really important for birds that nest in tree cavities. They're often a limited resource, which is why many people opt to put different boxes up on their properties. But if you have a natural cavity on your property, leave it if it's not something that's treacherous to leave. And last but not least, this you might like hearing this. I liked hearing this when I was a kid. Whenever you're raking those leaves up in the fall, leave them. Don't get rid of them. Let them stick around. Let them go ahead and decay because you're going to have cocoons or chrysalis from different species that have to overwinter buried within those. They'll also provide a good cover for species that are sticking around throughout our winter months, but they also can have different food resources left within that, and it'll make your soil nice and rich for the following spring. So if you don't want to rake this fall, then don't do it. It's actually better for your yard in the long run. Okay. A few safety precautions. If you want to attract birds to your yard, you have to also sort of understand that that's your responsibility to help protect the birds as much as you can. And a big part of that is keeping your cat indoors, if any of you have cats, and regularly cleaning your feeders and your bird baths. Okay. Birds are living organisms, they're going to have diseases, a variety of viruses, bacterial infections can spread really rapidly at feeders. And think about it as sort of a crowding event that we've really emphasized over the past year and a half is not good for public health. Well, it's kind of the same thing for birds when they're all coming to a common resource. If one bird is sick and contaminates that resource and all of these other birds come in behind them, then it can spread relatively rapidly. There is a new bird illness that is drawing the attention of researchers, particularly on the eastern seaboard and parts of the Midwest. And we don't know what it is. In fact, parts of the East Coast have been asked to take their feeders down. They do know that it is not a bird flu, that it is not West Nile, and a lot of the usual suspects that birds are known to have, it does not seem to be any of those particular illnesses. One of the major characteristics of this disease is the bird's eyes get really crusty and eventually they go blind, or they have neurological symptoms where they have trouble walking, they have trouble flying, or they just find the birds dead in their yard. They're finding that it really impacts a lot of mid-sized songbirds, so things like sparrows and blue jays and grackles. Thus far as I'm aware, it hasn't been detected in Wisconsin. They're keeping a really close eye on it. But if you do happen to find a dead bird in your yard, okay, please contact the health department and let them know, because this is something that they are keeping an eye on. It doesn't seem to be getting worse in the eastern part of the country, and they're hoping that maybe when the seasons change that it might turn the tide. But right now they do have folks that are actively working on trying to figure out what this is. We can help prevent some of this by just keeping our feeders clean. So seed feeders need to be cleaned every couple of weeks or so. And you can clean your feeders with either, you can either scrape all the old seed off and throw them in the dishwasher, or you can actually wash them in really hot soapy water. My personal favorite is actually washing them in a dilute bleach solution with 1 part bleach to 9 parts water, letting them soak for a bit, giving them a good scrub, letting them hang and get completely dry before putting new seed in them. If there's any molded seed or any molded suet in any of your feeders, you need to toss that immediately and clean your feeders. And if you do have a sick bird that is approaching your feeders, you need to take all the feeders down immediately, clean them, and then wait a little while before putting them back up. Now, hummingbirds do not seem to be affected by this new disease, which is wonderful. So I actually have all my other feeders down right now just to kind of be on the safe side, which I really didn't have much going to my feeders during the summertime. Most birds are feeding insects to their young right now, so they're not really hitting seed feeders too hard. But I left my hummingbird feeder up. And nectar and hummingbird feeders should be changed every 2 to 3 days. Otherwise, it can ferment and make birds sick, which is a reminder that I need to change my solution tonight. And a good recipe for hummingbird nectar is 1 part white sugar to 4 parts water. Bring it to a boil to make sure everything is nice and dissolved. It's also a sterilizing factor as well. Let it cool before you put it into the feeder. I actually put mine in the refrigerator for a little while, and then you can add it throughout the week. About after 5 days, toss it, and then make a new batch for the following week. And then last but not least, cats. I love cats. I have always had house cats, but cats are not great for birds, particularly those in urban areas. And they have found that free-ranging domestic cats will actually kill up to 4 billion birds a year, which is astounding. But we get it. Cats like to hunt. They're not evil by nature. This is part of their behavioral patterns. So you can entertain your indoor cats by actually putting a feeder in close proximity to a window. I promise you, they will stay and they will watch it all day, unless they're real couch potatoes like mine have been. But placing feeders outside and bird baths in areas where they can have cover really close by is really good for helping to protect them from stray cats. Okay, so if you have a feeder, make sure that you have it placed within 10 feet of a nearby bush or a nearby tree, to where if a stray cat happens to wander through the area, they can have somewhere to bolt to provide some cover. All right. And some other cool things that you might attract. Like I said, my 6-year-old is obsessed with butterflies. So that pollinator garden was really more for the monarchs for her. For me, it was more about attracting the hummingbirds. But you, by just improving your backyard habitat, you'll get lots of different pollinators that stop by. Bats from a variety of insects, bees, of course, being one of the most important. But you'll get lots of other things too. You'll get raccoons, which aren't necessarily my favorite in my backyard. We actually removed some native shrubs from my backyard because raccoons were enjoying the berries a little too much and then using my backyard as a latrine. But a variety of different other mammals. We have lots of chipmunks, we have rabbits, we even have deer that come into our yard in the middle of the city. So whenever you make your backyard more like a natural habitat, well, it makes sense that things that live in natural habitats are going to want to take advantage of those resources you're providing. All right, so here are some additional resources that you folks may be interested in. For learning more about birds, I highly recommend going to the Cornell Bird Lab website. Cornell is sort of the mothership for all things bird. If there's a bird that you just don't know what it is, or you want to know how to attract a bird, or you want to know how to provide cover or a nesting cavity for a particular type of species that dwells in cavities, this would be an excellent resource for you. For help with native plant selection, the DNR in Wisconsin has a really good website. In addition to information on the website, they also have additional resources that can tell you where would be the best place to potentially order seeds from, or different nurseries in the area that you can go and shop and check out things yourself. Okay, so good resources, highly recommend. And with that, that's all I have. Most folks here in Wisconsin really do appreciate bringing wildlife into their backyard. So you folks may actually be able to tell me a few things. But I've enjoyed having a conversation with folks, and be more than willing to take any questions.
Hi, Susan. Thank you so much for doing this program.
Sure thing.
Yeah, I'm kind of a new gardener because I have a big backyard with um, lots of hosta and a decent amount of shade because I have a big black walnut tree.
Yeah.
So I can only plant certain perennials because that jugulin in the soil will kill some of the
Right.
perennials. So anyway, I was very happy to hear you say that purple coneflower and the black-eyed Susans and that kind of things
Mhm.
will attract birds. And I did keep my milkweed because I like attracting the monarchs, but I didn't realize birds like that too. So somebody told me that putting a slinky on the pole of the shepherd's hook will keep will keep away squirrels, like attaching it closer to the top. What do you think of that?
You could try it. You could try it as long as the slinky itself doesn't like provide a caging type apparatus where a squirrel could get caught in it. Um, I mean, squirrels will I've seen them chew through a variety of different things that I never thought they could chew through. Okay. They have destroyed like all of my kids' backyard plastic toys that they have. I mean, one of them carried a frisbee up into the tree the other day that we have in our yard. It's nuts. You could certainly try it though, and see what happens. I mean, if you notice that the squirrels are doing really goofy things like getting caught in it, obviously take it down. But hey, I'm all for ingenuity. And if it works, go for it, and if not, well, just chalk it up to the millions of other ways that squirrels have thwarted us in this regard.
All right, thank you. I have lots of questions, so I don't want to take the time if somebody else has something to say.
I will just say thank you very much, Susan, for presenting. It was a good presentation. And yeah, Linda, if you have more questions, go ahead and ask them. If the McCartney have questions, they can ask as well. As long as Susan's okay with it, we'll just.
Yeah, I mean, it won't take that much time. So shepherd's hook, like if I want to have a number of different kinds of feeders, are there like hooks available that you can put a whole bunch of different things on there?
There are. So, I mean, even just looking online at some places simple as Amazon, you can actually find hooks that have multiple branches off of them. Um, I recently purchased one for my field site that has a place where you could put a platform feeder, you could put a thistle sock, you could put a suet feeder down below. Some of them will even come with a little attachment that you can put on that is a little shallow water basin where you could put water in it, or you could put orange slices in it if you were trying to attract migrants that happen to be coming through. They're relatively inexpensive. I want to say the one I purchased on Amazon was something like $45 or something like that. You can spend a fortune on shepherd's hooks, especially if they're really good quality, which I don't dissuade people from doing because the winters here are beast on yard furniture. But yeah, you can certainly get those that can hold more than one.
I feel sorry for you having to adjust to our winters.
So my husband and I have lived here since 2013. We actually moved here, and our first winter was the polar vortex
Oh,
of 2013, and it was hard. It was really hard. We lived in an apartment at that place, and we didn't have our kids yet, so that kind of made things a little bit easier because we lived in an apartment. We didn't have to take care of a home. We didn't have to shovel and things like that. But we purchased a home the following year, and my girls are locals. They were both born in Madison, but we now own a snowblower, so I feel like we're a true Wisconsinite. Um, my husband invested in like nice coveralls last year to go out with the snowblower, and I saw him out there yelling across the street to all the other people with their snowblowers. So I feel kind of like we're becoming more local.
yeah.
Um,
If
but
you watch Manitowoc Minute, you'll laugh a
yeah.
lot, and then you'll feel, yeah, you maybe won't want to be a local then. So.
Well, my kids have no choice. My kids love the cold.
Oh, good.
It's insane. They love the cold. As soon as, I mean, like my daughter, my oldest, is already complaining that summer's lasting too long because she loves the snow. Like looks forward to picking out her snowsuit every year. She loves the snow. My 4-year-old likes the snow for about 20 minutes, and then she's ready to go back inside. But my oldest, oh my gosh, she absolutely loves the winter time here.
Well, that's good. At least they have adjusted. I've got like a bird bath, and it's a ceramic bottom, and it has like this green algae stuff that I scrub, and it won't come out. Is that bad?
It's hard to get all of algae out, especially if you have like like if there's spaces between the ceramic pieces. Sometimes the algae like to affix to that and grow on that. And I would recommend making sure that the water is changed frequently, because usually for that to become an issue, it has to be sitting for quite some time. I would recommend changing the water frequently, which is a good idea anyway to kind of dissuade mosquito larvae from hatching in it. But also cleaning it relatively frequently as well. I mean, you might not be able to get all of it out, but at least you would get it from becoming a huge problem and making a lot of extra growth. But yeah, and anywhere you go, I mean, if you go to any of even the local botanical gardens, if you look at any of their artificial ponds, they're struggling with algae too.
Okay.
Yeah,
And should I use that same bleach solution
I
in
would.
that?
I
Okay.
would just make sure that whenever you do scrub it down really nice, that you rinse it really well as well, and let it dry absolutely completely. Put it out in the sun, let it dry for a couple days, and then refill it. Um, that'll just make sure that any trace of bleach is gone by that point. But this is such a dilute bleach solution that it's not going to harm anything.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. My last question is about cats because my neighbor has a couple cats that roam our yard,
Hmm.
and so I don't know that there's anything I can do about that. But I do have a lot of shelter, a lot of bushes and trees in my yard, so hopefully that would ward off any attacks.
Yes, that's really the only thing you can do. It bothers me when folks let their cats roam just because I work with birds, and I've lived in places before where people didn't take care of their pets or let them roam feral, and every now and then I would find them under a feeder. I did my best to dissuade them from the feeders if I could, You know, if I saw them approaching my feeder, I would just try to head them off at the pass and get them to go in another direction. Um, but aside from, you know, especially if they, even bells on cat collars aren't really that effective because it's a novel sound to a bird. They're not used to hearing a bell and they don't necessarily associate that with danger. While they might hear it, it might be more of an inquisitive type response, like, oh, what's that? But as long as you have cover, that's really the best thing that you can do in the situation.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wish folks would leave their cats inside. And it's not the cat's fault. Cats like to hunt. That's part of what a cat is. But my cats, I only have one cat now. We used to have three, and my cat Kit loved to sit in the windowsill and watch birds all day long. And even if given the opportunity to go outside, like whenever we did let her go out for a little bit to see if she just liked the snow or whatnot, she absolutely hated it. She much preferred just sitting inside and watching the birds at the feeder. So there are ways that you can satisfy that need in cats, without just necessarily letting them roam free. But it sounds like you've got a pretty good situation that, I'm not going to say a cat's never going to get a bird in your yard, but if they have cover, that will drastically reduce their hunting success.
Good. Good. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate it. Thanks for listening. It helps.
So I have one question, Susan.
Sure.
And we didn't talk about it much, but what about nesting birds? Like, for example, I have a robin couple that they build their nests every year on our back porch. And we let them because I love them and they're not hurting anything. But my husband always wants to know if we should throw the nest out right away, like after the babies leave. Like, should we move it? Should we leave it? What, I mean,
I don't necessarily, part of me thinks robins do not reuse their nest.
okay.
Um, I'll double check and I'll let you know for sure. I know cardinals don't.
Okay.
Cardinals don't reuse, but here's why nest removal is kind of tricky. It's because birds and all of their associated, what's the right word? Um, Cavities, nest, everything associated with them that they have made that's naturally theirs.
Mhm.
It's actually protected under the Migratory Bird Act. And
Okay.
so removing a nest and handling a nest can technically get you in trouble
Okay.
legally. So I have to do what I do with birds, with my research. I catch birds, I ban birds, and I take measures and things of birds. I had to have a ton of permits to be able to do
Okay.
that. In order to collect nests, you have to have a scientific collector's permit.
Oh, okay.
So my advice to folks, because I get a lot of questions from folks, particularly with swallows.
Mhm.
Nobody likes having the swallows build those mud nests up.
All over the barn.
Yeah. And most people don't like it. And what should I do about the nest? And the thing is that, well, ideally, if you don't want the nest there, you can dissuade them. You can try to dissuade them from building there in the first place by putting some stakes up in the area and things like that. Although I have seen swallows that have just been like, oh, this is nothing. I'm going to build my nest in the stakes.
Yeah.
It's fascinating what they will do. But once they've established it, though, you're supposed to leave it alone.
Okay.
You're supposed to leave it alone. Now, anything that's not only just migratory birds, but resident birds as well.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. I get a lot of questions.
Curious.
Well, because sometimes wildlife can be kind of messy. You know, back home in Louisiana, my mom always has a Carolina wren nest on the wreath on her front door. And she's like, well, Susan, she did it again. I'm like, well, Mom, I mean, in the future, maybe don't leave the nest there. Maybe don't leave the wreath there for her to nest in the first place.
Sure.
Um, if it's kind of a nuisance. And my mom's worry about it was that constantly opening the door was going to eventually cause the eggs to fall out of the nest.
Sure.
So it was a valid concern. But yeah, anything that birds create or whatnot, we're not technically supposed to be able to collect.
Okay.
Touch
Okay.
it.
And what about like a bird house? Like, do you need to empty those out? I know some people like,
So that's a little, yeah, that's a little trickier. Once the nest has been removed, okay, like let's say it's been through the season or whatnot, it's recommended that folks do clean those, okay,
Okay.
because in that small cavity, I mean, birds and they're young, they will have, fecal sacs that are left behind and everything. It's recommended to clean those. And eventually, you're right. If you have nest on top of nest on top of nest, eventually you're not going to have anywhere to for a new pair to establish a nest in the future. So with those, after the breeding season, after the conclusion of the breeding season, with those, I believe it is okay to go ahead and remove that.
okay, thank you.
No, yeah, no worries. I used to have whenever we lived in Mississippi, we had a really large backyard, and we always had bluebirds that would come into our boxes and would nest every year. And it was always such a treat to watch. And I haven't seen it so much here in Wisconsin. I don't see as many bluebirds here or whatnot. And where we live now, we would never attract anything. We don't have the yard for it. But a lot of bats are really popular here as well, bat boxes and things like that. So we're actually looking into potentially getting a bat box for our backyard. We have quite a few bats that hang out. One of my neighbors also really likes birds. They have a purple martin house that right now is unfortunately being occupied by house sparrows, because that's what they do. But yeah, now house sparrows are a different story. House sparrows being invasive, those a little different story, because they are invasive and they aren't protected under legally. Those you can go and get rid of nest and things like that. It's house sparrows are kind of people are encouraged to dissuade them from coming to their feeders, because they will outcompete other species for nest cavities, and that eventually will have a really harmful effect on their on the native species reproductive success. So in fact, a lot of wildlife rehabilitation centers won't even take house sparrows if they're injured or anything like that, simply because they're invasive. Yeah. Yeah, I've got one of my feeders earlier in the summer was kind of invaded by house sparrows, which if you live in an urban area, you're going to attract house sparrows. It just seems that's the way. I changed my seed up a little bit. That kind of helped somewhat. But eventually when I saw that all I was attracting was house sparrows, I took it down, and they moved on. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much again, Susan. It was a great presentation.
No worries.
Thank
Oh yeah, no worries. Any questions that you want to relay to me, feel free to contact me. My email address is devriesm, DEVRIESM @uww.edu. You can also go to the UW Whitewater Biology Department page, and you can find me listed on there as well. So I answer all kinds of bird questions from folks on a pretty frequent basis. So.
I bet.
Well, it's fun. It's fun. I love it. Most Wisconsinites really have an appreciation for the natural world, and I love that. I love that. So I appreciate good questions.
Well, thank you. Good night.